California, 1882. Silas Thorne had spent 15 years buried in the gold mines of Grass Valley. He had inhaled rock dust, survived falling stone, and saved every tiny flake of gold he could find. At 45, he used everything he owned to buy an abandoned ranch beside the American River. The locals called it the Ghost Place. No one had crossed its broken gate in 10 years. Then, one September evening, Silas heard the soft rhythm of approaching hoofs. A young Chinese woman rode through the gate on a mahogany horse. She wore a magnificent gown of deep purple silk. She looked at the ruined farmhouse and spoke 6 words that changed his life.
My father built this house. Before winter arrived, Silas would risk his land, his safety, and the peace he had sacrificed his youth to find. And the millionaire's daughter would discover that a poor cowboy could offer her something all her father's money never could, a place where she could live without hiding her name. This is an AI-assisted fictional story inspired by real conditions in the American West. It includes historical prejudice, brief intimidation, and non-graphic data. No graphic violence or explicit content is depicted. The woman guided her horse toward the weathered farmhouse. Silas stood beside a newly repaired fence post, his rough cans still covered in soil. She sat atop a mahogany horse with the poise of a displaced queen. She did not wear the practical calico or denim of the valley. She wore a gown of deep, shimmering purple silk. The fabric glowed like a bruised plum in the fading light. Her hair was as black as a raven's wing in flight. It cascaded down her back in a straight, shimmering river of darkness. Her face was pale and composed, though sorrow lived in her dark eyes. She looked like she belonged in a forbidden palace, not a dusty ranch. Silas stood perfectly still. He felt the sudden crushing weight of his own ragged clothes. He felt the layers of dust embedded in his skin. The woman pulled the reins with a gentle strength. Her horse stopped exactly 3 feet from the split-rail fence. She looked at the house. She looked at the freshly turned earth. Then her gaze locked onto Silas. Her eyes were dark and swimming with a pain he knew by heart. "You have changed the gate," she said. Her voice was soft as a falling leaf. It had the lilt of a distant land, mixed with the sharp precision of a scholar. "I bought the place," Silas replied, his voice gravelly from disuse. He took off his hat in a gesture of old-world respect. "I am Silas Thorne." She didn't move an inch. She didn't offer a hand or a smile. "My father built that house," she said. "He told me the willow trees would always protect it." Silas felt a frown deepen the lines on his face. "The bank said the owner was a man named Miller." The woman gave a small, bitter smile that didn't reach her eyes. Li Wei Chen was his true name. To the greedy bankers in San Francisco, he was the Millionaire Miller. He owned several shipping vessels and built his fortune in the Pacific tea trade, but he could not own his own name in this country. Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the September wind. He knew the whispered stories of the secret tycoons, Chinese men who built massive empires but hid behind white names to survive. "He is gone?" Silas asked quietly. "He died in a warehouse fire near the San Francisco waterfront," she whispered. "I am Mei Lin. I have come for the things the fire could not touch." She dismounted with a fluid, graceful motion. The silk of her dress rustled against the dry, golden grass. It was a sound of absolute luxury in a place of desperate poverty. She walked toward the skeletal house. Silas followed her, keeping a respectful distance. He felt like a common intruder on his own legal property. She stopped at the porch steps. She reached out and touched the wood he had just sanded smooth. "He loved this soil," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said the real gold was in the grass, not the dark mines." Silas watched her. She looked fragile, like a piece of heirloom porcelain. But her hands, though small, were remarkably steady. She turned to face him, her expression suddenly urgent. "The townspeople are coming, Mr. Thorne. They saw me ride through the village in this dress. They do not like my kind on this side of the river." Silas turned his head toward the long, winding road. He saw a rising cloud of orange dust. 3 riders were approaching at a gallop. He recognized them instantly. They were the Miller brothers from the neighboring ranch. They were men with booming voices and microscopic hearts. They had coveted this land for 10 long years. They wanted it for nothing, or they wanted it to burn. Silas stepped firmly in front of Mei Lin.
He didn't truly know her. He didn't owe this stranger a single thing. But he knew the difference between law and justice. He knew the foul smell of a bully. The riders screeched to a halt at the fence. "Thorn!" the oldest Miller brother shouted. "What is that Chinese woman doing on your porch? Congress passed the Exclusion Act in May. Soon enough, people like her will have no place anywhere in this valley." Silas felt a slow heat rising in his chest. The law did not give these men the right to threaten a woman. But men like the Millers had never needed the law. They only needed an excuse.
"She's a guest on my property," Silas said. His voice sounded like two grinding stones. "And my property ends at that front gate, which means you're standing on the wrong side of it." The men laughed, but it was a thin, nervous sound. Silas Thorne was not a man people enjoyed fighting. He had the shoulders of a man who spent a lifetime moving mountains. "You're making a catastrophic mistake, Silas," Miller spat on the ground. "Keeping company with her will cost you everything. We'll see you in town." They yanked their horses around and rode away. But the air remained heavy with a silent threat. The peace Silas had sacrificed his youth for was gone. Mei Lin looked at him, her eyes wide. A single crystalline tear tracked down her ivory cheek. "You should have let them speak," she said softly. "Now they will hate you as much as they hate me." Silas put his hat back on, pulling the brim low. "I've been hated by much better men than them," he said. "Come inside, Miss Lin."
The tea isn't fancy, but it's hot. They sat at the small, scarred wooden table. The house smelled of fresh cedar and very old memories. Mei Lim told him her story as the shadows lengthened. She had been sent to an elite school in England. Her father wanted her to be a lady of the world. He wanted her safe from the rising tide of prejudice in the West. But a waterfront fire in San Francisco had destroyed his warehouses and taken his life in a single night. Corrupt lawyers had picked the bank accounts clean. The lawyers had forced the ranch into foreclosure before Mei Lin returned from England.
The bank had taken the land and sold it to Silas. The only thing left in her possession was an old survey, a letter from her father, and a small key. The key opened a lacquered box hidden somewhere inside the farmhouse. Her father had called the ranch the Heart of the Willow. "And I have not come to take the ranch from you. I only want to recover what my father left inside this house." "I do not want the money," she said. Silas helped her search the farmhouse as evening shadows filled the rooms. Behind a loose board beneath the staircase, Mei Lin found a small lacquered box. The key turned with a faint metallic click.
Inside lay several faded letters and a bundle wrapped in velvet. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were several small paper packets painted with tiny red hearts. Each packet held a handful of dark seeds. "These are from my mother's garden in Guangdong," she whispered. "My father promised her they would grow here. He died before he could ever plant them." "These are from my mother's garden in Guangdong," she whispered. "My father promised her they would grow here. He died before he could ever plant them."
Silas looked at the seeds. He looked at the woman who had traveled halfway across the globe for a handful of dirt. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in his frozen heart. He had lived for 15 years without feeling a single thing. Now he felt everything at once. He felt the staggering weight of her loneliness. He felt the quiet, unbreakable strength of her dignity. If Silas and Mei Lin's story has touched you, please subscribe and stay with us. Because before morning came, someone would try to burn their future to the ground. The rain began to fall in earnest that evening. It was a cold, biting, relentless rain. Mei Lin could not leave the ranch. The dirt roads would soon be a churning river of mud. Silas gave her his only bed without a second thought. He slept in the barn with Barnum. He lay in the dry hay and listened to the rain drumming on the tin roof. He thought about the purple silk dress against the gray wood. He thought about those heart-shaped seeds. He realized with a shock that he didn't want to be alone anymore. But the world outside was cruel, and it would not allow it.
The next morning, the sun rose with a deceptive brilliance, but the air was thick with smoke. Silas ran to the porch, his heart hammering. The covered haystacks at the far edge of the field were burning. Someone had set the fire during the night. The flames had started beneath the wooden shelter, where the rain could not reach. Silas did not need proof to know who had done it. Mei Lin stood beside him, her face pale. She did not scream. She simply watched the black smoke rise into the morning sky. "They will not stop until we are gone," she said. Silas grabbed his shovel and a heavy bucket. "I'm not leaving this land," he said, looking into her eyes, "and neither are you." He spent the entire morning fighting the advancing flames. Mei Lin did not remain safely inside the house. She gathered her purple silk skirts above her boots. Then she carried bucket after bucket from the creek until her arms shook. Soot stained her dress. The wooden handle rubbed her palms raw. But she refused to stop while Silas was still fighting beside her. By noon, the fire was finally out. They sat together on the blackened, steaming earth. Both of them were covered in gray ash. Silas looked at her, seeing the woman beneath the silk. She looked back at him with a fierce, quiet fire in her eyes. In that moment, the barriers of race and class simply vanished. They were just two human souls fighting for their piece of the world. He reached out and gently wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead. His hand was rough as sandpaper. She closed her eyes for one brief second and leaned into his touch. "Why stay, Mei Lin?" he asked softly. "You could go back to the city. You could find a way back to England and be safe." She shook her head, tears finally welling in her eyes. "My father's spirit is buried in this ground. If I leave, he truly dies for the final time. And you, Silas Thorne, why do you fight for a stranger like me?" Silas looked down at his calloused, scarred hands. "Because you aren't a stranger," he said. "I've been looking for something worth protecting my whole life. I think I finally found it when you rode through that gate." Mei Lin looked at him through her tears. No man had ever made her feel so protected without first trying to control her. The romance between them grew like the willow trees themselves. It was slow, deep-rooted, and incredibly resilient. They spent the autumn working the land as one. He taught her how to drive a plow through the stubborn earth. She taught him the beautiful names of the stars in her native language. Together, they planted the heart-shaped seeds she had brought. Weeks passed. Silas began leaving a cup of hot tea for her before sunrise. Mei Lin repaired the torn curtains and filled the silent house with songs from her childhood. Neither of them spoke of love, but each morning they looked for the other before beginning the day, and each evening the distance between their chairs became a little smaller. The town whispered and pointed whenever Silas went for supplies. The town whispered and pointed whenever Silas went for supplies. The local sheriff came by twice to warn them. He spoke about the decency of the white community. He hinted that trouble would follow if Mei Lin remained. Silas stood quietly between the sheriff and the front door. "This ranch is my home," he said, "and no decent law punishes a woman for planting a garden." One night, as the first winter frost touched the grass, they stood on the porch. The mountains were painted silver under a full moon. Silas took a small, handmade box from his pocket. It didn't contain gold from the deep mines. It was a simple ring, a local fashioned from one of Silas's old silver coins. "I don't have a palace to offer you," he said. "I only have 160 acres and a house that needs a lot of paint. But if you stay, I will spend every day making certain you never feel unwanted again." Mei Lin took the ring, her fingers brushing his. She didn't look at the silver. She looked directly into his eyes. "I do not need a palace, Silas. I only need a home where I am allowed to say my own name." Silas closed his rough hand around hers. "Then your name will be honored in this house for as long as I live." They were married in the garden as the sun set. There were no fancy guests or loud celebrations. There was only the whispering wind and the ancient trees. The Miller brothers tried once more to frighten them, but this time several neighboring families stood beside Silas at the gate. The Millers had expected one stubborn man and one frightened woman. They had not expected a community. They rode away and never returned. Silas Thorne had spent his life learning how to endure. Mei Lin taught him what it meant to belong. Years passed like a dream. The Willow Creek Ranch became famous across the valley. It wasn't famous for gold or cattle. It was known for the beautiful bleeding heart flowers that grew beneath the willows. Their deep red blossoms hung like tiny hearts from every bending stem. They flourished in the harsh California soil. They were a living symbol of a love that defied an entire empire. Mei Lin and Silas grew old together on that porch. Even after her hair turned silver, Silas still saw the young woman in the purple dress riding through his broken gate. They sat in the same chairs every evening. Their children ran through the high grass beneath the willow trees. They grew up knowing both their mother's true name and their father's quiet courage. The world outside continued to change. Laws were made, and laws were eventually broken. But on the ranch, the willows kept their quiet secrets. History often forgets the quiet people. It forgets the men who bought the land no one wanted. It forgets the daughters of millionaires who chose dirt over gold. But the land itself always remembers. Every time the wind blows through the willows, it whispers their names.
It tells a story of a time when courage was a silk dress and a fence post. It tells us that family is not just a matter of blood. Family is whoever stands beside you when the barn is burning. If Silas and Mei Lin's story touched your heart, tell us which moment stayed with you. Please like the video, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes love can grow in difficult places. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your heart open. God bless you all. Until then, may your own fences be strong and your heart be open. Keep your eyes on the horizon. God bless you all.